The desolate wind carried the scent of rust and decay across what once had been the sprawling metropolis of New Meridian. Taylor pulled his protective mask tighter as he gazed across the skeletal remains of skyscrapers that jutted from the earth like the ribs of some enormous, long-dead creature. The year was 2125, and humanity had entered what scholars now called the slow apocalypse, a century-long period of gradual planetary deterioration following the great disaster of 2100. At 32, Taylor had spent most of his adult life as a biological resource surveyor, carefully documenting the planet's dwindling biodiversity. He'd been a research assistant at the Earth Technology and Biological Institute, ETBI, before its funding had dried up like everything else. Now he lived in the Old City Belt, a makeshift community nestled within the hollowed-out structures of what had once been downtown New Meridian. Society had fragmented into scattered, self-governing settlements. Technology was in decline as energy sources became increasingly scarce. Humans had reverted to simpler ways of living, trading scientific advancements for survival necessities. The grand dreams of interplanetary colonization had given way to the grim reality of scraping by on a wounded Earth. An undefined anxiety permeated daily life. Everyone believed the worst had passed, but no one knew when, or if, the collapse would truly end. Most simply carried on, heads down, focused on the day-to-day business of survival. Taylor's comm device buzzed against his wrist. The message was brief, but urgent. Discovery at Eastern Sector. DN-100 confirmed active. Meeting at Institute Remnant. 1800 hours. Encrypted. His breath caught. DN-100, the ecosystem destruction bacteria, was supposed to be dormant by now. Created during the resource wars as a biological weapon, it had mutated beyond control, attacking soil biomes and destroying agricultural capacity worldwide. If it was still active, when Talar arrived at the crumbling ETBI building that evening, he found Dr. Hyacinth waiting in what had once been a state-of-the-art laboratory. Now, it was little more than a room with salvaged equipment and flickering solar-powered lights. The elderly scientist's face was grave. "Thank you for coming, Taylor," she said, her voice low despite the empty building. "We've discovered something troubling." 6 other former ETBI researchers were gathered around a makeshift conference table, faces tense in the dim light. "Our survey team detected DN-100 biosignatures in the deep soil layers near the Eastern Archive," Dr. Hyacinth explained, activating a holographic display showing soil composition charts. "It's not dormant as we believed. It's mutated again, working slowly but steadily." "How bad?" Taylor asked. "Bad enough that I'm forming a secret investigation team," she replied. "The Old City Belt government wouldn't want this information public. Panic would destabilize what little order remains." "And you want me to join?" Taylor said. It wasn't a question. Dr. Hyacinth nodded. "Your expertise in biological resource assessment is invaluable. We need to determine if DN-100 is truly hindering Earth's natural regeneration process, or if it's just another convenient excuse for the Belt governments to tighten resource control." Taylor thought of his sister, Maya, who had died during the Great Disaster, one of millions who hadn't survived the collapse of the agricultural system. He hadn't been able to save her. Perhaps this was his chance to make amends in some small way. "When do we leave?" he asked. The journey began 3 days later. Talar, Dr. Hyacinth, and 3 other researchers formed the core team. They traveled along what had once been a major highway, now reduced to cracked concrete, overtaken by hardy, scrubby plants. The arid corridors, once bustling metropolitan areas, stretched before them, a wasteland of collapsed buildings, rusted vehicles, and occasional clusters of desperate scavengers who watched their well-equipped party with suspicious eyes. Their solar-powered transport hummed quietly as they passed through the ruins of what had once been called Pittsburgh. Here, the devastation seemed particularly pronounced. Land subsidence had created vast sinkholes where entire neighborhoods had disappeared. Groundwater samples taken from a brackish puddle revealed alarming toxicity levels. "The contamination pattern matches DN-100 activity," said Quinn, the team's mechanical engineer and Talar's longtime friend, a stocky man with perpetually grease-stained hands. Quinn operated the modified survey drones that allowed them to gather data without exposing themselves to potentially contaminated areas. "We should reach the village outpost by nightfall," Dr. Hyacinth said, studying their route. "Perhaps the locals can provide more insight." The village called itself Harmony, though Talar found the name ironically inappropriate. Built from salvaged materials on the outskirts of the arid corridor, it housed approximately 300 people, eking out an existence through basic agriculture and trade. Their fields were noticeably struggling, with withered crops and discolored soil. As the team set up their equipment in the town's communal building, villagers gathered, eyeing them with a mixture of hope and distrust. An elderly man named Amun approached, leaning heavily on a walking stick fashioned from an old metal pipe. "You're from the Belt," he stated. "Come to help, or just to study our misery?" "We're investigating soil conditions," Dr. Hyacinth replied diplomatically. "Then you'll want to see the dead fields," Amun said grimly. "Nothing grows there anymore. Children born nearby come with twisted limbs. The old die of strange wasting illnesses." He gestured to a young girl with malformed arms, standing nearby. "That's Lan, born right as the fields began to die." Taylor felt a familiar pang of guilt. These were the real victims of the slow apocalypse, ordinary people suffering while those in power controlled information and resources. That night, as the team reviewed their data, Talar raised the question that had been troubling him. "If DN-100 is still active, can we stop it? Is there a way to neutralize it after all this time?" Dr. Hyacinth looked up from her tablet. "Theoretically, yes. The original DN-100 had a genetic failsafe, an enzyme that could break down its molecular structure. But the samples we're finding have mutated significantly. So our efforts might be pointless," Quinn said bluntly. "No scientific endeavor is pointless," Dr. Hyacinth replied sharply. "Knowledge itself has value." Taylor stared at the soil composition data scrolling across his screen. "What about the people living here? Don't they deserve to know what's happening to their land?" "Knowledge without solutions breeds panic," Dr. Hyacinth countered. "We need more data before we make any announcements." The disagreement hung in the air, the first crack in the team's unity. Talar respected Dr. Hyacinth immensely, but he couldn't shake the feeling that keeping secrets was part of what had led to the great disaster in the first place. Too many people making decisions for others, withholding critical information in the name of stability. Their exploration of the dead fields the next day was sobering. Once fertile farmland stretched before them. Now, a wasteland of gray-brown soil that crumbled like ash. Nothing grew here except occasional patches of strange, oily mold. Their equipment detected extreme DN-100 contamination. As they collected samples, a group of armed individuals appeared on the horizon. Quinn spotted them first. "We've got company," he warned, adjusting his protective goggles. "And they don't look friendly." The approaching group wore the distinctive insignia of the Resource Protection Brigade, a paramilitary organization that controlled resource access in the region. Their leader, a stern-faced woman, approached with her hand resting on her holstered weapon. "This area is restricted," she announced. "By whose authority are you conducting tests here?" "We have permission from the Old City Belt Scientific Council," Dr. Hyacinth replied, producing documentation. The woman examined it skeptically. "The Belt has no jurisdiction here. This is Harmony territory, under brigade protection." "We're simply gathering data," Taylor interjected. "The soil contamination affects everyone." "Information can be dangerous," the woman replied coldly, "especially when it leads to resource conflicts between belts. You have 1 hour to finish your work and leave." As the brigade members withdrew to a watchful distance, Quinn muttered, "Charming welcome committee. They're afraid. Taylor observed. Knowledge is power, and they don't want to lose their control over local resources. Dr. Hyacinth's expression was troubled. There's something else. I found partial archives in our database. DN-100 wasn't just a weapon that got out of control. There's evidence it was deliberately engineered to maintain a controlled deterioration of global ecosystems. Why would anyone do that? Quinn asked incredulously. To control the recovery, Dr. Hyacinth said quietly. Biological corporations created it to ensure they could dictate the terms of ecological restoration, selling solutions at premium prices to desperate governments. The revelation settled heavily over the team. Taylor felt sick. The slow apocalypse wasn't just a natural consequence of ecological collapse. It was being actively maintained. Their survey work continued for weeks, following the contamination patterns across the arid corridor. They documented increasing DN-100 presence in deeper soil layers, confirming Dr. Hyacinth's theory that the bacteria was designed to ensure long-term ecological control. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. While exploring an abandoned research outpost near the Eastern Archive, Taylor discovered a sealed underground chamber. Inside, preserved in a temperature-controlled unit, was an intact vial of original DN-100 culture. This is incredible, Dr. Hyacinth breathed, examining the vial through the protective glass. A pure sample could help us develop a counteragent. As they carefully extracted the sample, an alarm system they hadn't detected suddenly activated. Red lights flashed silently, a security measure designed to alert someone to the breach. We need to leave, Quinn urged. Now! They barely made it back to their transport before a sleek, well-maintained vehicle approached from the east, a stark contrast to the cobbled-together transportation most survivors used. The insignia on its side belonged to Roki Industries, one of the few corporations that had not only survived the collapse, but thrived in its aftermath. Trouble, Taylor muttered. The team retreated to a safe distance and observed as armed personnel emerged from the vehicle and entered the outpost. Their equipment was military-grade, another sign of the vast resource inequality that persisted even after civilization's collapse. Roki's people, Quinn confirmed, watching through binoculars. What would a corporate magnate want with an abandoned research station? The same thing we want, Dr. Hyacinth replied grimly. Control of DN-100. Back at their temporary base in Harmony Village, Dr. Hyacinth explained what she knew about Roki, the enigmatic businessman who had built an empire from the ruins. He controls multiple belt territories through resource manipulation, she said. Clean water, functional technology, medicine. He leverages them all. If he's interested in DN-100, it's not for humanitarian reasons. Could he weaponize it further? Taylor asked. Worse, Dr. Hyacinth replied. He could commercialize it. Imagine selling climate management devices that actually spread DN-100 variants, keeping areas dependent on his solutions. The implications were staggering. If Roki gained control of DN-100, he could essentially hold entire regions hostage, demanding payment for temporary relief from ecological devastation. Their fears were confirmed days later when a violent confrontation erupted at the edge of the dead fields. Roki's mercenaries clashed with local militia who were attempting to prevent the corporate forces from establishing a research perimeter around the most contaminated areas. Taylor and Quinn observed from a distance as gunfire echoed across the barren landscape. The militia was outmatched, their cobbled-together weapons no match for the mercenaries' military-grade equipment. This is about more than just research, Talar said, as they watched the militia retreat. Roki's staking a claim. And the people caught in the middle will suffer most, Quinn added grimly. When they returned to Harmony, they found the village in turmoil. Several injured militia members were being treated in the communal building. Among them was the woman who had confronted them earlier, Mila, commander of the local Resource Protection Brigade. Your corporate friends play rough, she said, when she saw Talar, wincing as a village healer cleaned a wound on her arm. They're not our friends, Taylor replied, kneeling beside her. "We're as concerned about their presence as you are." Mila studied him skeptically. "Then why are you here? What's so special about our dead soil that brings both scientists and corporate thugs?" Taylor exchanged a glance with Dr. Hyacin, who gave a slight nod. "We believe the contamination in your soil, DN100, is being deliberately maintained," he explained. "It's not just a residual effect of the Great Disaster. Someone is ensuring Earth doesn't heal too quickly." Mila's expression hardened. "And who benefits from that?" "Anyone who can sell the cure," Dr. Hyacin said quietly. The revelation sparked intense debate among Harmony's leaders. Some wanted to abandon the settlement entirely, seeking less contaminated lands. Others advocated fighting back against Roki's forces. The tension in the village grew palpable as resources dwindled and fear spread. During this turmoil, a strange phenomenon occurred that gave Tullar pause. After a rare acid rain shower, patches of wild fungi began sprouting in sections of the dead fields. Life, where none had existed for years. Samples revealed the fungi were somehow neutralizing small amounts of DN100 in the soil. "Nature finding a way," Quinn observed as they examined the specimens. "Or showing us a way," Talar replied thoughtfully. Dr. Hyacin's analysis of the fungi provided valuable insights into potential DN100 neutralization methods. But their work was increasingly hampered by Roki's expanding presence in the region. His mercenaries now controlled access to the Eastern Archive, where they believed critical information about DN100's origins and weaknesses might be stored. The situation deteriorated further when Mila's scouts reported that Roki's people had established a processing facility at the edge of the dead fields. Drone surveillance confirmed they were extracting contaminated soil samples and processing them in sealed containers. "They're harvesting DN100, Dr. Hyacin concluded grimly, "preparing it for deployment elsewhere." "We need to stop them," Taylor insisted. "If they weaponize this, countless communities could be affected." "With what army?" Quinn asked pragmatically. "They're better equipped and better trained than any force we could muster." The answer came from an unexpected quarter. Mila approached their makeshift lab, her arm still in a sling from the previous confrontation. "My people want to help," she said without preamble. "This isn't just about Harmony anymore. If what you say is true, Roki threatens every independent community." "It would be dangerous," Talar warned. "His mercenaries won't hesitate to use lethal force." Mila's expression was steely. "Neither will we. This land may be dying, but it's still ours." The alliance was uneasy at first. Mila's fighters viewed the scientists with suspicion, while Dr. Hyacin worried about involving civilians in what could become a bloodbath. But necessity forged bonds where trust couldn't, and together they developed a plan to infiltrate the Eastern Archive. Meanwhile, Dr. Hyacin made a breakthrough with the original DN100 sample. Hidden in its genetic code was the formula for a degradation enzyme, the fail-safe built into the original design, but removed from later variants. "This could neutralize DN100, she explained, showing Tellar the molecular structure on her tablet. "But there's a complication. The enzyme doesn't just break down DN100. It temporarily reverses some environmental toxins as well." "Isn't that good?" Tellar asked. "In theory, yes. But the reversal process is unpredictable. It could cause a cascading reaction that turns dead zones into something even more volatile. Some areas might recover, while others could become more toxic than before." The revelation placed a terrible responsibility on their shoulders. Using the enzyme meant gambling with the future of already devastated regions. Not using it meant allowing DN100 to continue its slow destruction of Earth's recovery potential. "We need more data," Dr. Hyacin insisted. "The Eastern Archive might contain records of early enzyme tests." Their infiltration plan took shape over the following days. Quinn modified their survey drones for reconnaissance, while Mila trained her fighters in coordinated strike tactics. Taylor worked with Dr. Hyacinth to synthesize small batches of the degradation enzyme, preparing for various contingencies. As they worked, Taylor found himself increasingly drawn to Mila. Her fierce determination to protect her community reminded him of his sister, the same unwavering commitment to those she cared about. One evening, as they reviewed tactical maps, he asked her why she stayed in Harmony despite its obvious challenges. "Where else would I go?" she replied simply. "My parents died when the fields began to fail. This land killed them, but it's still home." She traced her finger along the boundary of the dead fields. "Besides, running doesn't solve anything. The poison just follows. In the water, in the soil, in the air we breathe." "What if we could change that?" Taylor asked cautiously. "What if the enzyme works?" Mila gave him a measured look. "Then we'd have hope. But hope is dangerous these days." The night before their planned infiltration, Dr. Hyacinth shared a final discovery that changed everything. Her analysis of historical records had revealed that DN-100 was originally designed as a final tool to prevent global starvation centuries ago. It was meant to preserve certain agricultural zones while sacrificing others, a desperate measure during climate collapse that had since mutated beyond control. "The creators never intended this outcome," she told Talar as they stood beneath the stars. "They were trying to save what they could of a dying world." "Does that matter now?" Talar asked, watching distant flashes of heat lightning on the horizon, another symptom of the damaged atmosphere. "It matters because intention shapes solution," Dr. Hyacinth replied. "DN-100 wasn't created for profit, but for survival. Its failsafe might be more comprehensive than we realized." The Eastern Archive loomed before them the next day, a massive concrete structure partially reclaimed by the Earth. Once a seed bank designed to preserve biodiversity, it had become a fortress under Roki's control. Armed guards patrolled its perimeter, and surveillance drones hummed overhead. Their plan relied on timing and distraction. Mila's fighters would create a diversion at the main entrance, while Talar, Dr. Hyacinth, and Quinn entered through a maintenance tunnel identified by their reconnaissance drones. If successful, they would access the central database, locate records on DN-100's failsafe mechanisms, and extract without engagement. But plans rarely survive contact with reality in the wasteland. The diversion worked initially. Mila's people drew most of the guards to the northern perimeter, with a series of small explosions and faint attacks. Taylor's group successfully infiltrated the maintenance tunnel, navigating by the pale blue light of Quinn's salvaged tech lamps. The archive's interior was a labyrinth of storage vaults and research facilities. Most had been ransacked long ago, but the central server room remained intact, its systems powered by Roki's generators. Dr. Hyacinth worked quickly to access the databases while Quinn kept watch, and Talar searched for physical samples that might have survived. In a climate-controlled chamber, Taylor discovered what they'd been seeking: containers of liquid DN-100 in various evolutionary stages, alongside vials of what appeared to be the degradation enzyme. As he carefully secured samples, an alarm suddenly blared throughout the facility. "We've been detected," Quinn warned through their comm system. "Hostiles approaching from the east corridor." "I need more time," Dr. Hyacinth insisted, her fingers flying across the interface. "The failsafe protocols are encrypted." "Make it fast," Taylor urged, sealing the sample case. "Mila can't hold them off forever." Outside, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Roki's mercenaries had deployed heavy weapons against Mila's fighters, forcing them into a defensive position. The diversion had become a pitched battle with mounting casualties on both sides. Dr. Hyacinth finally extracted the critical data just as the first mercenaries reached the server room door. Quinn held them off with a jury-rigged sonic disruptor, while Talar helped the elderly scientist gather her equipment. "We have what we need," she said, clutching a data drive. "The complete formula for the degradation enzyme, including modifications for current DN-100 variants. Their escape route was cut off, forcing them to improvise. Quinn led them through ventilation shafts to an emergency exit on the western side, emerging into chaos. Mila's fighters were in full retreat, pursued by mercenaries with mechanized combat suits, technology that should have been impossible to maintain in the resource-scarce wasteland. "Roki has resources we can only dream of," Quinn muttered as they took cover behind a collapsed wall. They were nearly clear when disaster struck. A mercenary spotted them and opened fire. Dr. Hyacinth pushed Taylor aside, taking a hit that knocked her to the ground. Quinn returned fire, giving Taylor precious seconds to drag the wounded scientist to safety. "The drive," Dr. Hyacinth gasped, blood staining her weathered hands as she pressed the data device into Talar's palm. "The access code is Maya's birthday." Talar's heart froze. He had never told Dr. Hyacinth his sister's name. "How did you—" "I knew your family. Before," she whispered. "Your sister was my student. So promising. I'm sorry I couldn't save her." Before Talar could process this revelation, Mila appeared with 2 fighters, providing covering fire. "We need to move, now!" They retreated to a rendezvous point, several kilometers away. Dr. Hyacinth's condition worsening with each passing minute. By nightfall, they had reached a temporary safe house, an abandoned water filtration plant that Mila's people had converted into a fallback position. As a healer tended to Dr. Hyacinth, Taylor examined the data drive. The code, his sister's birthday, unlocked detailed schematics for synthesizing the degradation enzyme at scale, along with predicted environmental impacts of its deployment. "Can we use it?" Mila asked, joining him after checking on her wounded fighters. "Yes," Talar replied, studying the molecular diagrams. "But the consequences are complicated." He explained Dr. Hyacinth's warning about the unpredictable nature of the enzyme's environmental effects. Some areas might recover rapidly, while others could experience toxic reactions that made conditions worse. "So we're gambling either way," Mila concluded. "Life is always a gamble," came Dr. Hyacinth's weak voice from her makeshift bed. "But sometimes, you have to play the hand you're dealt." The next morning brought news that Roki himself had arrived at the Eastern Archive, along with additional forces and equipment. Scout reports indicated they were preparing to transport the DN-100 samples to Belt territories, presumably to begin deployment as a control mechanism. "We're out of time," Talar told the gathered fighters and researchers. "We need to synthesize the enzyme and target key DN-100 concentrations before Roki can weaponize it further." Dr. Hyacinth, pale but determined, directed the synthesis process from her bed. Using equipment salvaged from their base and the archive, they produced a small batch of the degradation enzyme, enough for one significant deployment. "Where do we use it?" Quinn asked, eyeing the precious liquid in its containment unit. "The source," Taylor decided. "The Eastern Archive's storage facility. If we can neutralize their primary samples and data, we buy time for other communities to prepare." Mila agreed, adding, "And we need to make this public. Broadcast what we know about DN-100 to every Belt and independent settlement. Break Roki's information monopoly." The plan was desperate but necessary. While Quinn modified their communication equipment to boost broadcast range, Taylor and Mila prepared for a final assault on the archive. Dr. Hyacinth, too weak to join them, provided detailed instructions for enzyme deployment. "Remember," she cautioned, "once released, we cannot control its spread. The reaction may extend well beyond the immediate target area." "Understood," Taylor acknowledged, aware of the tremendous responsibility they were assuming. That night, as final preparations were underway, Roki made an unexpected move. A communication arrived for Talar, a direct channel request from the businessman himself. "I know what you're planning," Roki's smooth voice stated when Talar accepted the call. "And I'm offering an alternative. Join me. Your expertise is valuable, and together, we could manage DN-100 deployment for optimal recovery. You mean optimal profit, Taylor replied coldly. Profit drives progress, Roki countered. The belts with resources will recover faster under my guidance. That's simple reality. While others suffer and die, no thanks. Don't be naive, Roki's voice hardened. You can't save everyone. The enzyme isn't a miracle, it's a tool. And tools require skilled hands. My hands? Why do you care so much? Talar demanded. You already control more resources than most governments. There was a pause before Roki answered. Because whoever controls Earth's recovery controls humanity's future. It's that simple. The communication ended, leaving Talar troubled. Roki wasn't wrong about the enzyme's limitations. It wasn't a universal solution, but allowing one man to decide who recovered and who continued to suffer was unconscionable. Dawn brought the final preparations. Their plan was straightforward but dangerous. Mila's fighters would create multiple diversions around the archive's perimeter, while Talar, Quinn, and a small team would infiltrate the main storage facility with the enzyme. Simultaneously, they would broadcast their findings about DN-100 using the archive's own communication array, which had greater range than their cobbled-together equipment. The assault began under cover of an acid rainstorm, weather that kept most of Roki's aerial surveillance grounded. Mila's diversionary attacks drew predictable responses, allowing Talar's team to approach from the relatively unguarded southern access point. Inside, they encountered minimal resistance initially. Quinn hacked into the communication systems, while Talar and two fighters made their way to the central storage vault, where the DN-100 samples were kept. They were almost there when disaster struck. Roki himself appeared with a contingent of elite guards, cutting off their access to the vault. The businessman was tall and imposing, dressed in a protective suit that likely cost more than most settlements' yearly resources. I admire your determination, Taylor, he said, his voice amplified through his suit's speakers. But this ends now. Quinn's voice crackled over the comm system. Broadcasting initiated, signal reaching all major belts and registered settlements. Roki's expression darkened. You've made a grave mistake. DN-100 isn't just a bacterial strain. It's a safeguard against uncontrolled regrowth. Without it, ecological systems could collapse entirely. That's a lie, Talar countered. It was never meant to be permanent. You're maintaining artificial scarcity for control. As they argued, Mila's fighters engaged Roki's guards in a chaotic firefight. Talar used the distraction to maneuver closer to the vault entrance. The enzyme container clutched protectively against his chest. Roki noticed and raised his weapon. Don't. That enzyme hasn't been properly tested. The environmental backlash could be catastrophic. For a moment, doubt crept into Talar's mind. What if Roki was right? What if the cure was worse than the disease? Then, he remembered Dr. Hyacinth's words. Sometimes you have to play the hand you're dealt. And the villages, like Harmony, slowly dying as their soil turned to poison. He made his decision. As Roki lunged forward, Talar dove for the vault door. A shot rang out. Mila, providing cover fire. Roki staggered back, his protective suit damaged but not breached. Talar slammed the vault door behind him, finding himself in the climate-controlled chamber where rows of DN-100 samples were stored alongside research equipment. Quinn, status? He called into his comm. Broadcast at 90%. Every settlement within 500 kilometers is receiving data on DN-100 and the enzyme formula. But Roki's people are breaking through my encryption. We've got minutes at most. Taylor worked quickly, preparing the enzyme for dispersal through the vault's ventilation system. It would neutralize the samples here and potentially spread to contaminated areas nearby. A start, if not a complete solution. Outside, the battle intensified. Explosions rocked the structure, and warning lights flashed as systems began to fail. Taylor had just finished connecting the enzyme container when the vault door burst open. Roki stood there, his suit smoking from damage, weapon raised. Stop, he commanded. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly, Taylor replied, his hand on the release mechanism. This was never about saving the planet for you. It was about controlling who gets saved. And you think you're better qualified to make that decision? Roki snarled. You'll destabilize everything we've built since the collapse. Another explosion. Closer this time. The facility's structural integrity was failing. Quinn, Mila, get everyone out, Taylor ordered into his comm. The building's coming down. What about you? Mila's voice was tense with concern. I need to finish this. As if to punctuate his words, the ceiling partially collapsed, sending debris crashing between him and Roki. The businessman was thrown backward, pinned by a fallen support beam. His protective suit sparked and malfunctioned, exposing him to the air. In that moment, something unexpected happened. A container of liquid DN-100 shattered near Roki, splashing across his exposed skin. His scream was primal, the pain clearly excruciating as the bacteria began its work. Talar could have left him. Perhaps should have. But something in the businessman's agonized face, the raw humanity beneath the ruthless exterior, stopped him. The enzyme can neutralize it, he said, approaching cautiously. I can help you. Roki's laughter was bitter through his pain. Now you offer mercy? Too late. Always too late for this damned world. Another explosion rocked the facility. Taylor had seconds to decide. The enzyme could save Roki, or it could be released as planned to begin neutralizing DN-100 more broadly. He made his choice. With a final look at the trapped businessman, Taylor activated the release mechanism. The enzyme dispersed into the ventilation system, beginning its work on the DN-100 samples throughout the facility. You've killed me, Roki gasped as the first particles reached him. Maybe, Talar acknowledged. Or maybe you'll be the first to experience what real recovery looks like. He managed to escape the collapsing facility, just as the main structure gave way. The enzyme container, now empty, was clutched in his hand, a symbol of hope and terrible responsibility combined. Outside, the immediate effects were visible within hours. A radius of several hundred meters around the Eastern Archive transformed into a patchwork of extremes. Sections where plant life erupted in astonishing abundance alongside pools of intensified toxicity. The enzyme's interaction with various concentrations of DN-100 created a chaotic microcosm of destruction and rebirth. Roki's mercenaries fled. Their employer presumed dead in the collapse. Some reported seeing him emerge, horribly changed by DN-100 exposure, wandering into the wasteland beyond the dead fields. Mila's fighters, though reduced in number, celebrated their victory. The broadcast had reached far beyond their expectations, breaking Roki's information monopoly and alerting communities worldwide to the truth about DN-100 and the potential of the enzyme. Taylor, exhausted and wounded from the final confrontation, found himself faced with an immediate dilemma: how to best use their limited remaining enzyme. Some argued for applying it to Harmony's fields first, while others advocated sharing it with neighboring settlements. We can't save everything at once, Quinn pointed out pragmatically. We need to prioritize. Taylor thought of Dr. Hyacin, who had sacrificed so much to bring them this far. She hadn't survived her injuries, passing peacefully the night before the assault, but her legacy lived on in the knowledge she'd preserved. We distribute it through the canal system, he decided finally. Let nature help determine where it goes first. The waterways connect most settlements, and the enzyme can multiply in the right conditions. The decision wasn't universally popular, but it was implemented. Small amounts of the precious enzyme were released into key waterways, beginning a slow process of neutralizing DN-100 contamination along water routes. The immediate aftermath was both promising and sobering. Some areas showed rapid improvement, with soil toxicity decreasing and hardy plants beginning to reappear. Others experienced volatile reactions, temporarily becoming more dangerous as competing biological agents fought for dominance. Taylor blamed himself for the casualties in areas where the enzyme had unpredictable effects. But he also recognized that Hyacinth's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Communities were uniting around a common purpose for the first time since the Great Disaster, sharing information and resources to monitor and manage recovery. The militia, initially hostile, gradually became partners in the restoration effort. Mila took on a leadership role, coordinating between settlements to track enzyme spread and effects. She and Talar worked closely, their shared vision for recovery bridging their different backgrounds. 100 years later, in 2225, the landscape around what had once been the Eastern Archive had transformed. Now called the Transition Greenbelt, it was a region where vegetation had reclaimed concrete ruins, where canals ran with increasingly clean water, and where self-governing communities practiced the simple biological technologies preserved in Dr. Hyacinth's legacy. Taylor became a legendary figure, the founder of the recovery era, his actual deeds sometimes lost in the mythologizing of subsequent generations. What remained accurate in the stories was his insistence that humanity must change its relationship with the natural world for any recovery to be permanent. Roki, too, entered the collective memory, a cautionary tale of greed pushing a man to self-destruction. Stories told of his final days, DN-100 ravaging his body as he wandered the region now called the Valley of Decay, digging his own grave in the poisoned earth. Was the recovery sustainable? That question remained open. The enzyme had halted DN-100's destructive cycle in many regions. But other environmental challenges persisted. Climate instability continued to cause extreme weather events. Radioactive zones from desperate last stands during the collapse remained uninhabitable. Yet, there was hope. Tangible. Visible hope in the form of green spaces reclaiming dead zones, in water running clearer each year, in children born healthy, where once birth defects had been common. Perhaps most importantly, there was a new ethic emerging among the scattered communities of Earth, an understanding that technology must serve life rather than control it, that resources must be shared rather than hoarded, that humanity's role was to nurture recovery rather than dictate its terms. As an elderly woman named Lan, once the girl with malformed arms from Harmony Village, told visiting children in the community garden, "The earth remembers both harm and healing. Our ancestors taught us the cost of control. Now we must learn the power of letting go, of working with nature rather than against it." And in the soil beneath her gnarled feet, microorganisms continued their ancient dance, breaking down, building up, transforming, as they had for billions of years before humans arrived, and as they would for billions after. The slow apocalypse had given way to an equally slow rebirth, not an ending, but a continuation, not a miracle, but a process, halting, imperfect, and beautiful in its resilience. In the archives of the new settlement, carefully preserved alongside the enzyme formula, lay a journal, Talar's personal account of those pivotal days. Its final entry read simply, "We cannot undo all our mistakes. We cannot save everything we love, but we can choose to stop making the same mistakes over and over. We can choose to let healing begin, even when we don't control the outcome." Perhaps that's all recovery has ever been. The courage to take the first step without knowing where the path leads. And so the path continued, winding through a century of slow healing, toward a future still being written one seed, one cleansed stream, one reclaimed field at a time.